everyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of Top PM Voices. We have the one and only Tim Herbig with us. Hi, Tim. Welcome to our session.
Hi, Ala. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. I am Ayla. I'm a junior marketing manager here in Airfocus, and I'm tuning in from Istanbul, Turkey. It's a great weather here. Spring is here. It's actually a bit more warmer than we expected. We actually had the summer already, but I'm still enjoying the good weather and the sun. So drop a message on the chat box where you're joining from and how is the weather there. And Tim, where are you joining from and how is the weather there?
So I'm joining from Erfurt in Germany, and since typically nobody abroad knows it, imagine a straight line between Berlin and Munich, and right in the middle of that is where I live. I used to live in Hamburg for a long time, but now I live here. We had our fair share of some springy, almost summery days as well over the weekend, but today it's a little bit more gloomy, like 11, 12-ish degree. It's a little bit more
I think
tempered.
I like seasons, so I don't want to have summer right away. So I would love some clouds as well, actually.
Yeah. I also really like those in between seasons. Like I think my favorite season is the fall. But yeah, I guess I have to wait a little bit more for that.
I hope we don't skip it this year. So our topic is today from product strategy to quarterly OKRs, and Tim will give amazing insights on how we can actually build our OKRs on our product strategy. Just for all of our audience, you already seen the public chat there. So if you have a message during the presentation, please drop it there. And my colleague in the background, Nuran, she will collect all the questions. And then after the presentation, Tim will answer them as much as we can do. Our time lets us. So I think we are like 3 minutes in, so we can get started. Tim, would you like to start introducing yourself also?
Sure. Happy to do so. Again, hi, everyone. So my name is Tim. You already know from where I'm dialing in. These days, I work as a product management coach and consultant, with great, fantastic product teams pretty much across the globe, European and also non-European folks. I stumbled into product like so many people did in 2010 when someone had the great idea for an internal tool to say, hey, we're doing Scrum now, you're the product owner. And that went semi-well, as I would say, but it taught me a lot about what working agile means and doesn't mean. After that, I held multiple product management and head of product roles in small and bigger companies. A few of the bigger companies were larger publishing houses in Germany, or Xing, which is Germany's LinkedIn, some B2B and startup work in between. And I work independent since 2019 and have the privilege to work with a lot of different teams. And the topics that I focus on is really this intersection of product strategy, product OKRs, and product discovery, everything in between, how these things connect. And that's why today's topic is so fitting.
Yes, I am really excited because we are working with OKRs, and I feel like I'm like really confident about my team's OKRs as like a marketing team in a product management company. But let's see how our audience will feel like after the presentation. So I will just leave the stage to you, and let's get going.
Cool. Thank you so much. All right. So as you can see, I haven't prepared slides or presentation. We will look at some visuals together, but I want this webinar to happen in Miro. I will take you along the journey, and please pay attention to the chat, make use of the chat, because I have planned to work through a mock case with you. It's a mock case I've not completed myself, so this will be a lot of improvisation and ad hoc solutioning, which I really, really like. And to go through this with you, go through with product strategy journey to quarterly OKRs. The thing that I like to use to preface all of the stuff I do, I think it's common to sometimes people talk to you about the one way to do things, the best practices, that kind of stuff. And I'm not here to do that because I think it's not about best practices, it's about better practices, which are very, very contextual. So I try to focus on the fundamental value something has to provide for you compared to talking to you about the one rigid way of doing things. So everything I'm offering in this webinar is meant as a practice. There's nothing to perfect, to complete, to get right. It's really just an invitation. It's a set of principles I really want to offer you to try out, to be open, to grow into it. to grow into it. So to get started, I already talked to you that I really like to always take things back to the basics, which is what is the fundamental value any practice has to provide for us. And I would actually really like to get started with clarifying the fundamental value product strategy has to provide. So I would love to hear from you in the chat. What is the value product strategy has to provide to you as a practice for your team? Really, what's the fundamental, what's the job product strategy has to get done for you? Post these in the chat, and I'll make sure to document some of these in the Miro board. Don't be shy. As I mentioned, no wrong answers here. Why are you doing product strategy? Big direction of the product. Let's note that down. What else? What does product strategy has to do for you? Where the team is going? Guidance, yes. Focus, absolutely. Maybe one or two more prompts to make decisions and to define success, what not to do. All right, I see you get the gist. So let's move this aside and let me share with you what I think the core value of product strategy is. I think the core value of product strategy is whatever artifact you land on, and you will hear me talk about that. It's not so important what's the format, the framework you use, but really whatever the artifact is to use for product strategy is that it has to provide the product team with guidance on how to say no to opportunities. Typically over, let's say, 6 to 18 months in this time frame, of course, varies depending on your maturity, your product state, your company, your context you're in. And ideally, we're doing this based on user market data and based on company priorities. Right? So these are the two things. So that's my invitation. No matter the framework, no matter the approach you're taking, whatever you produce as a product strategy, what is called a strategy, it has to help you to say no to things over a time period of 6 to 18 months. So that's super important. I would love for us to tie everything back to this value. So if we continue, of course, more smart people on the internet had lots of thoughts on what product strategy really is. And the thing I want to highlight here to use to help us as a segue to go to product strategy is from Roger Martin, who once said, that strategy is an integrated set of choices that positions you on the playing field based on vision and goals in a way that you win. So for some reason, product strategy folks are obsessed with the sports metaphors of playing field and winning moves. We're just going to run with it, right? So if we take this statement of what product strategy is supposed to consist of, if we break that down, we can already understand like lots of different basically requirements for the way companies and teams should approach product strategy. So on the one hand, we talk about integrated choices, which means that all the choices we make of product strategy have to be coherent, right? You want to avoid a misalignment between the segment you're focusing on, the distribution channel you're focusing on, and the jobs you want to get done, for example. The playing field, which is, to be honest, a fancier name for the target market you want to go after, is really just, okay, what's the audience we want to focus on? What's the audience we want to serve? Which audiences are we not going to serve? And what kind of jobs do we want to get done for them? Vision and goals, kind of self-explanatory, but it's important to highlight that this is just a component or a couple of components of product strategy. A vision and goals are not a replacement for product strategy. They're part of it, but they're not a replacement. So to make sure that the vision gives us this overarching guidance to make sure we avoid random choices. And winning really just means, okay, based on the long-term vision and the market we want to go after, the audience we want to serve, what kind of bets, what kind of choices can we make to make sure that we get chosen on this market based from our target audiences. So again, it's important to dissect these to understand what's in there, because this really should inform the way you approach product strategy, again, independent of the format, independent of the framework. So moving on from that, I think it's important to break things down a little bit further and understand that product strategy, if you want to, can actually be quite atomic, right? I like this term from Atomic Habits, from James Clear, and thinking in atomic modules can sometimes be very helpful. I see a lot of teams getting lost in the frameworks and the canvases and not really knowing where to start with product strategy. But if we take this fundamental value product strategy has to provide, we can already see that there are 3 fundamental patterns you can find in any strategy framework or canvas that you basically want to try to answer for different components. first thing is, what's the strategic narrative? Meaning, why is it us? Why do we want to act now? That's the overarching pattern. Then we have the playing field pattern I just talked about, which basically articulates for whom are we trying to do something, which also includes the alternatives and the jobs you want to solve for these people. And the winning moves are then basically, how are we going to serve them? How are we going to reach them? How are we going to differentiate? So these are the fundamental high-level patterns. And again, there are a bunch of different ways you can fill these patterns. And that's the thing that's oftentimes forgotten. That's just not one shape or form of product strategy. If you take these fundamental patterns to heart, the narrative, the playing field, the winning moves, there are a bunch of options out there of what kind of product strategy components, individual components you want to use to fill or answer these product strategy patterns. To articulate your narrative, you can work with the company strategy, your values, your long-term business goals, your mission, your product vision, your North Star metric. To answer the playing field, we can talk about user segments and buyer segments when you're B2B, what kind of jobs you want to get done for them, what are the alternatives you're competing against, it's another part you can utilize, and more. And the winning moves is really, what kind of value propositions do you have? What kind of services do you offer? How do you plan on reaching your audiences through distribution channels? How do you plan to differentiate your offering? And again, these are just options you can have, right? So these are all individual product strategy components you can utilize to fill your product strategy patterns. There's not a one-size-fits-all way of articulating a product strategy. Pick the components that all help you to get this fundamental job done we talked about earlier, which is what helps you to say no to things on a mid to long-term perspective. So that's the fundamental bit on product strategy, right? And the last thing I want to touch on from a fundamental perspective is another challenge I see very often whenever I get to work with product teams is this relationship. Because when we talk about product strategy, and if we move very early stage companies aside, product never exists in isolation, right? A product always exists within a company. And I really like this way of thinking, which I've adopted from Ravi Mehta and also Casey Winters, which talk about the different levels of strategy, right? You have the company strategy, you have product strategy, and you also have feature strategy. And you have to understand what kind of boundaries and constraints do you get from the company level, for example, which, for better or worse, just narrow your focus to articulate your product strategy, right? So we talked about the coherence defined by Roger Martin as well. And one aspect of the coherence is also how fitting your product strategy is for the company strategy you're working within. So if we look at this example, right, and this is a semi-made up example, we have the company, the product, the feature level. And what I basically want you to remember as a metaphor is that if you're gonna think from company to product to feature level, that for each of the three patterns, the narrative, the playing field, the winning moves, it's basically like a funnel that gets smaller the more you move to the bottom. You have a very broad articulation of your strategic focus on the company level, naturally, and these choices get even narrower the more you move to the product and the feature level. So for example, you might have heard of ActiveCampaign, which is an email marketing platform. And there's an interesting case study which I've shared, which I can link later on, from someone who led the product that was acquired by ActiveCampaign, who talked about his strategy journey. So for example, if we take the playing field and look at the company, product, and feature level strategy choices, for example, on the company level, ActiveCampaign might say, okay, we're going to focus on solopreneurs. That's an audience we want to focus on, which also inevitably means that Fortune 500 companies or agencies are non-focus audiences, right? So that's the high-level strategy choice the company made. And again, if you continue this metaphor of moving closer to the product level, which then narrows the focus, is that the product team naturally should make choices about their audience that are in line with this company choices. So in there, they might say, okay, we focus on solopreneurs, and we might focus on specific solopreneurs, like maybe solopreneurs that have online courses, and also solopreneurs that have marketing managers on the team already. And it also means that they also, again, will not focus on agencies, or they can also make certain choices about not serving solopreneurs with high-ticket consulting offers. So this is just a very simplified glimpse into this fundamental idea of when you feel lost in your product strategy, remind yourself that you have to sit within the boundaries of your company strategy and apply this funnel thinking of the company makes choices at the company level. Hopefully they make choices. And these should get narrower the more you move into the product and the feature space to ensure you have alignment and don't focus on segments or audiences on the product level that don't align with the company level. So that's on the fundamental bits of product strategy. Again, we talked about the value of product strategy, what it has to do for you, this atomic nature of product strategy, the patterns and the components, and how to apply this thinking and positioning of product strategy to company strategy and to ensure alignment. So that's all the fundamental stuff in place. And what I now want to do with you is to work through this mock case. So let's move a little bit to the right. And I want to be very, very clear. This is a made-up example, right? I've never worked with a car marketplace company. This is completely made up. And we're going to work with an example company, which is called AutoCircuit, right? And AutoCircuit is a car marketplace for luxury cars, which mostly operates in Europe. So it's quite a mature company, as you can tell by the number of employees. So there are more than 2,000 employees working at AutoCircuit, and on the digital product side, they have more than 12 product teams operating there. So you could say it's kind of it's like a corporate, right? And again, they have distinct attributes. They focus on Europe, and they focus on luxury cars, right? That's what AutoCircuit is about. We're going to use that to build our case from the company strategy to product strategy to OKRs. I told you that it's important to understand the context of your company strategy to make sure that you have the right funnel to work in on your product strategy. So to give you an example, some of the choices the company made strategically is on the one hand that they want to expand to the US. That's a clear choice. They want to change the market they want to go after. And that's also a great example of the type of choices you want to see at the company level. Those fundamental bits like changing markets, changing the business model, that's the stuff you need to have happen on the company level. So, and they have articulated some long-term goals related to that strategic move. They want to have a certain percentage of market share in the US, and they also want to have a certain GMV, gross margin value, achieved by the end of 2025 as well. And they also, on the company level, they say, okay, we always have competitors. We want to differentiate through a turnkey experience, meaning that our customers, the buyers and sellers of luxury cars, have very little to do themselves. They don't have to get their hands dirty, essentially. And we also want to differentiate through operational efficiency. Right? That's the company context. Again, overly simplified, but these are the type of choices you would like to see on the company level. And the case we try to build here, is that we're going to pretend we're the intake product team. And what do I mean by intake is essentially that this is the team that's responsible for getting a car onto the platform, right? So whenever a seller wants to get rid of their cars, want to sell the car, that's the team that is responsible for getting basically the car onto the platform. That's the idea of the intake product team, right? I already see a couple of great questions popping into the chat. We will work through your general questions towards the end of the webinar. Throughout the webinar, I will always continuously invite you to share your thoughts, your contribution as we build this mock case. But I'm already seeing these great questions, and they already give me food for thought. So it's my challenge now to stay focused, continuing with the mock case. So we have the company case, we have the team context. Let's move a little bit closer. So more context on the intake product team. Again, as I mentioned, they are basically responsible for the process of evaluating and offering your car onto the marketplace. And they also have a product vision, right? I think people often forget that a vision does not just have to happen on a company level. You can have your own vision on a product level, which I think is an important ingredient for product strategy as well. And for the intake team, they basically say the vision, which is, as a brief reminder, which is supposed to say, okay, describe the future state you want to create for your target audience. And the future state the intake product team wants to create is, if it's from a seller perspective, if it's valuable to you, you can make it valuable to someone else. Right? That's the, again, lofty vision statement. And again, remember, vision statements can be lofty because we have the strategy and the goals to make things more tangible. So that's where we're coming from. That's the intake product team. Now, let's try to build their product strategy. I deliberately focused on the two patterns of the product strategy, which is the playing field and the winning moves, since we don't have to debate visions in here. So again, we come from this idea of we have some context on the company strategy, and now it's your turn as a product team to figure out, well, what is my contribution to the company strategy? What's within my sphere of influence? What are the strategy choices I make? So again, on the playing field, the company has said, we want to expand to the US, and we want to continue to enable people to buy and sell premium cars. two key choices, right? That's the key job, that's the audience they're serving. And that on the consequence means also that you also not want to focus on Asia, and you also don't want to focus on providing B2B mobility as an example of what not to do. And this is a fascinating exercise for all of you. Whenever you articulate your strategy, I always invite you to not just define the segments or the jobs you want to focus on, but try to explicitly write it down. What are you not focusing on? Try to write an anti-strategy statement. So fascinating to see if you actually made a choice. All right. Now, my question to you is, what could be audiences or jobs within the constraints of the company strategy the intake team could take on as their strategy focus? I want to give you a few examples to get started. So, of course, you can segment your audience any way you want. But one example could, for example, be, obviously, it's US, right? So it's US sellers of Teslas, right? Could be one segment. Tesla could be considered a luxury car, and they maybe realize, look, to go to the US, and the company's goal is to have a high market share. Maybe they have found out that Tesla is one of the most used most sold cars there. So it would make sense to focus on the US sellers of Tesla. And maybe they also figure out that Tesla's actually, I think it's a real thing, that Tesla is almost like prohibiting the reselling of cars, at least with the Cybertruck, they're doing that. So you could try to solve the job for US sellers of Tesla, sell Tesla without getting banned or punished by Tesla. Right? Could be a real job. Again, that's the first level of coherence. You want to make sure that you solve the job for the right audience. So US sellers of Teslas could be an audience and a job within the constraints of the company. What other segments come to your mind the intake product team could take care of, could focus? What segments of car sellers do you think exist? Vintage premium cars. I love that. What could be a particular job for sellers of vintage premium cars? What could be a problem, a job we could solve for this segment? Yeah, car dealers. That's another great segment. That could go B2B, right? Company did not make an explicit statement about that, right? Restoration, yeah, exactly. Restoration without using vintage state. Yeah, could be a job in order to sell it. Electric car, used car dealers in general, that's great. Electric car dealers are already, you clearly understood the assignment, right? Vetting state of the car. Yeah, from a seller perspective, vetting the state of the car, getting the state of the car vetted. Yeah, that's another great job. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the dealers for now, just to play with this example of having strategic focus, right? So even though the company didn't exclude it, maybe the product team says, look, we want to explicitly focus on the B2C market here. We're going to focus on private sellers, right? So private US sellers of premium cars. We have the restoration bit, we have the Tesla problem, and maybe we have this getting the car vetted, right? Particularly for those vintage premium cars. I have no clue about vintage cars, but I like the idea of where we're going. Okay. So you already see the idea, right? We made some choices as a product team that are in line with the company choices, and we even make our own choices and trade-offs to make sure we don't focus on everything. We also say no to things. So what could be value propositions? What could be value propositions or differentiators the intake product team could offer as part of the product strategy? How could they differentiate from competitors? What could they offer on the high level? We're not getting to feature level here, But what could be high-level services or value propositions they could make part of their product strategy? Let's focus on those private vintage cars. Vetting the state of the car. Again, I think maybe this like no touch vetting, right? To make sure that the luxury owners don't have much to do. Then that could be a value prop. Quick delivery, yeah. Let's say maybe not a quick intake, right? Because the delivery would happen for the buyer. We're only the team focusing on the seller. Good customer service. Think to be more specific. Good customer service is not really a good strategic choice, because the opposite would be bad customer service. Nobody wants to have bad customer service. So what could be a specific way of specialized customer service? It's like maybe you have customer service done by fellow vintage car owners, right? I love the package selling with insurance, because that might be particularly hard for vintage cars to insure them and get them set up. Right? Also, we could think of the turnkey experience. Remember, that's what the company wants to be about. So we want to make sure that the vetting doesn't involve too much physical effort for the sellers. We don't want them to have to drive the car somewhere else themselves, maybe. And maybe we also have the differentiator, because we already sold so many cars in Europe with so much data, right? So there's probably price predictor accuracy, right? Because we're not a new company entering the market. We have a lot of ideas about how many cars are being sold, a lot of data from there, right? So again, remember, I saw a couple of great suggestions in the chat, but when it comes to strategy, remember, we want something that allows us to say no to things. And things like good customer service or good buyer experience just don't allow us to say no to things. You could get swamped by feature requests by your stakeholders or customers and don't have something to say no to. Again, we want to be specific. We want to make specific choices that allow us to say no to things, right? So we have the no-touch vetting, the quick physical intake, the customer service, then my fellow vintage car owners. We have the package selling with insurances, right? Let's focus on these jobs and these differentiators. Again, you could make this much more detailed, and you actually should in your case, but just to give you the high-level idea, that's where we're coming from, right? So we said we focus on the private US sellers of vintage premium cars. We have the job of restoration without losing vintage state, getting the car vetted. So we have a no-touch vetting, quick physical intake, customer service, and maybe with these things we could make part of our product strategy. Okay, so that's the product strategy bit. Again, super simplified, but you probably get the idea where we want to go. Now, of course, this webinar is not just called How to Do a Product Strategy. We talk about product strategy in quarterly OKRs. So let's talk about the OKRs next. Again, just like we did with product strategy, I want to make sure that we don't get lost in getting the framework right without understanding the actual value it's supposed to provide. And I think the actual value of product OKRs is that they have to provide you with guidance and allow you as a product team to measure your progress towards those strategic priorities by responding to your everyday decisions. That's what you have to do. You need metrics that respond to what you're doing as a product team and that help you measure your progress to strategic choices. That's what OKRs have to do. You don't have to care if they're written right for any OKR guru or whatever. They have to look and work in a way that allow you to do exactly that. That's the value of product OKRs. So keep that top of mind. So to also be very explicit, like where product OKRs sit, because I talked about the fact that goals are not a replacement for product strategy. So typically OKRs sit between this ambitions layer and the tactics layer, right? So if we want something that helps us to measure progress, we need something like the vision and the strategy in place, and the OKRs should help us to quantify how winning looks like if we actually manage to win in the market. And an OKR, as you probably all know, consists on the one hand of an objective, which is this inspiring description of the next step, like the qualitative statement, and we complement that with 2 to 5 measurement criteria per objective. And these measurement criteria could be everything. You might hear people tell you it's only supposed to be outcomes. I'm a little bit more pragmatic. I think whatever metric you can measure that helps you measure your progress works for you. Because again, it's about the value of the OKRs and not to meet someone else's standards here. So that's why we do OKRs. That's where they sit. And now let's talk a little bit more how they relate to strategy. So you might have high-level artifacts like your mission and your strategy. And then you have discovery and delivery, where all the magic happens and all the execution happens. And of course, in between, there's something that's typically called the OKR cycle. So you have the actual OKR definition. You maybe have some OKR alignment between other product teams or management or C-level. Ideally, you have OKR check-ins. I always get a little bit nervous when teams only reflect on the OKRs at the end of the quarter. You want to have metrics that continuously change throughout the quarter as a result of your actions. And then at the end of the cycle, you also want to be able to reflect, right? To do a retrospective or review on your OKRs to take those into the next cycle. That's how you want to operate with OKRs. That doesn't mean that you always have to do separate meetings for that, you have to do new meetings for that. This could be part of your existing routines already. And an important thing that I found when I work with product teams, because it's easy to get lost in, oh, we wrote a great objective and we wrote key results like insert OKR guru told us to. I think it's important to make sure that your OKRs are useful. And one bit to increase the chances of them being useful is that they are influenceable, detectable, linked, and evidence-informed. It doesn't mean all of these 4 have to be done. This is not a checklist. This is not something you have to tick off. This is also not a framework. This is basically a set of attributes that just increases your chances of your OKRs being useful. And remember, we just talked about what usefulness means. Right? So that's the idea of where OKRs are coming from, what they're supposed to consist of. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And that's also what will guide our transition, right? So let's actually take a screenshot here to continue to work with this strategy expression we made. I'm going to put that onto the Miro board. Because now it's time to go from product strategy to OKRs. And one way to do that is to actually summarize the product strategy choice you made. And one of the first in-between steps you can do is to not try to get lost in articulating your OKRs right away, but you can basically do that step by step and work with a proxy metric first. I like this idea. Like Gibson Biddle talks about this as well. It's by no means a new concept, but you think about, okay, if we have this product strategy choice, what could be a proxy metric? And basically, this is not about frameworks. This is about questions. And the question a proxy metric should answer for us is, well, 12 months from now, which 3 metrics would tell us that this strategy choice has worked, right? So we talked about the metrics the company has. We have the market share, we have the revenue, the GMV, but these are not suitable goals for product teams. Product teams have a much more narrow sphere of influence, and that's why you need to have your own goals. So if we come from this strategy choice that we want to focus on US sellers of vintage premium cars, because we know this is a huge market in the US and people love to sell vintage cars. We know some of the key pains they have, which is the restoration without losing the vintage value and getting a vintage car vetted and securely sold. We have thought of a couple of value propositions we can offer here, like the no-touch vetting, the quick physical intake, customer service by fellow vintage owners, et cetera, et cetera. So considering this is our product strategy choice, we said what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. Which metrics could tell you that this choice has worked? Let me actually pull these down so it's easier to see them side by side. So what metrics could tell this product team 12 months from now that this strategy choice has worked? Which metrics could they focus on? Number of sold cars? Not quite, right? I think the bit is I want to pay people attention to. Again, we talked about the specificity. So in this case, it wouldn't just be about the number of sold cars, because remember, this is the intake product team. So the intake product team cannot really influence a car being sold. That would be the combination of the checkout team and the seller team. So what metrics can the intake team use to measure their success along the product strategy choice of supporting private US sellers of vintage premium cars? What metrics could they focus on? Number of cars on the shelf. Yeah. And again, let's be more specific. It's not just about any cars. It's about number of vintage, let's say, ready to sell vintage cars on the platform, right? That would be one. Number of Teslas on the shelf. Again, Jonas, we talked about the Teslas, but let's focus on the vintage cars case for now. Percentage of, I think maybe it's not share of intake, but it could also be a ratio of completed vintage car intakes, right? Delay for intake cars, Smaller X. Percentage of sellers using the no-touch vetting. I like that. And you could say ready to sell vintage cars could also include, free of repair, fully insured. Maybe they could also have a metric that would be around the average selling price of offered vintage cars on the platform. Number of locations where the service is available. Maybe it would be, maybe it's not, let's say number of available. So the thing I want to point out here is, and again, the thing with strategy and goals is it's a bit of a garbage in, garbage out situation, right? The more unspecific your strategy is, the more unspecific your goals will be. And the more specific the strategy is, the easier it will be to have specific goals, right? So we're not looking to increase the number of cars per se. It's about, here's another good one, average time. This one. Just because I saw the question of Francisco, actually, I would argue we're not forgetting that because we're focusing on the US market, right? All the audience is about private US sellers, and consequently, we're trying to solve the jobs of US sellers. We have value propositions aimed at those US sellers, and the company goal is market share in the US. And this is just our entry segment, our wedge, our chasm, whatever you want to call it. So I would say we're not neglecting this idea of the market share. This is just the thing we focus on to break into the US. Does that make sense, Francisco? Let me know in the chat. Number of sale order per month. Again, sale order is not something the intake product team can influence, right? So remember, we focus on the specific sphere of influence and what to focus on. So again, it's all about this coherence. The metrics have to be in line with the strategy choices. The strategy choices are about certain segment of US sellers. So if you've read Cross the Chasm or read posts around like what's the wedge of your product strategy audience, this is just the private US sellers of vintage premium cars. It's just the specific segment we focus on to break into the market, right? So let's take one metric. Let's take the number of ready-to-sell vintage cars. Because the thing is, as you might have already, or let's take a couple of them. This one. As you might can tell, these metrics are relatively lagging. Right? These metrics are great. They're specific to the product strategy. But if we go back to the value of product OKRs, they probably don't change as frequently as we would want to. Right? So these are some potential product proxy metrics. But what that now have to do is, since these are probably more lagging indicators, right, which are on the impact, high-level outcome side of things, we need to figure out what are more leading indicators we can use as a product team to get to actually quarterly OKRs. Again, remember, that's what we're here for. Those metrics we just came up with, those proxy metrics, match the time horizon of our product strategy, which is like 6 to 18 months. We need to break this down further. So we have those great lagging indicators, but we need to break these down further because we want metrics that move faster, change faster. So we don't just want to have definitive results of the past. We want to trade certainty for responsiveness because our OKRs need to change at a certain pace. So lagging to leading indicator, again, it's not so much about frameworks. It's all about answering questions. And the favorite question you have to think about is basically, or the technique you can utilize to go from lagging to leading indicators is to basically imagine how can you reverse engineer the customer journey, right? So if you have a lagging indicator, you can think about, okay, which behaviors and which actions can I focus on that drive the lagging indicator, that drive this leading indicator, et cetera, et cetera. As you build out this sequence, you have a much better understanding of what's the pool of options of leading OKRs, of leading indicators I can utilize for my quarterly OKRs as a product team. And so that's the idea. And again, so the key question we're trying to answer is what measurable actions or behaviors will lead to increased chances of the lagging indicator changing. So let's pick our lagging proxy metrics, and let's take this one, right? We have the number of ready-to-sell vintage cars, and ready-to-sell means free of repair and fully insured on the platform. And of course, it's US vintage cars to make sure we carry through this strategy choice. And we don't have to get the order of it totally right, because obviously we don't understand the customer journey here. But what are measurable actions or behaviors that would drive this metric? What are measurable actions or behaviors that would drive the number of ready-to-sell US vintage cars on the platform? What are behaviors leading up to that? Like picture your typical customer journey of getting a vintage car, if you have one, or any car sold on the platform. What kind of behaviors do you have? Don't worry the order, just put them in the chat. We're trying to collect some potential leading indicators. US sellers, yes. US sellers, registered US sellers, for sure. Yeah. Number of vintage cars brought to the platform. Again, that's quite close to the leading indicator already, right? You could say it's the number. It's maybe not fully insured, but it's quite close. What needs to happen before the platform, what's the process? What's happening before the car's on the platform? Number of cars are renovated, yeah. Renovated cars, that could be a leading indicator, right? Before the car's on the platform, maybe we need to have the number of started intake processes, right? That could be quite a leading indicator. What other measurable behaviors could contribute to our lagging indicator of a ready-to-sell US vintage car being on the platform? Number of cars vetted. Consequently, you might also have a number of vetting processes inquired. Maybe we also have insurance claims, insurance quotes received. What other leading indicators come to your mind? Purchasing power. Yeah, purchasing power would be difficult to have that because we're looking at the sellers right now. Again, remember, we're the intake team. Maybe it's like selling price predictions sent out, received. I realize not all of us are owners of vintage cars, so this might be a little bit harder to make up. But remember, in general, number of listed cars with a breakdown on models brand, yeah, lead to customer conversion. That's a good one. Listed cars with a breakdown on models and brands, yeah. All right. Again, we have a bunch of different leading indicators, and chances are we might not understand the journey of how US cars. Owners of US vintage cars operate fully. And that's totally fine. We don't have to. We might understand from our existing work or the strategy assumptions, we understand certain processes, but we don't know everything, which is totally fine because basically those leading indicators should result in OKRs we can use on the one hand for delivery work, which is evidence-based OKRs. So maybe we already know, okay, we want the number of registered US sellers and number of started intake processes and number of cars vetted. Maybe these are things we know we want to drive. Maybe these are more leading indicators we can move already for delivery. But maybe we also don't understand really let's say we have to, maybe it is something along the lines of exploring life cycle of US vintage cars. Understanding buyer emotions attached to US vintage cars. These are, of course, not OKRs yet, but these would have to be articulated to be much more explorative, right? So it's totally fine that in your strategy, you still have areas of uncertainty. Some things you might be very clear on. Okay, we want to drive the number of registered sellers. We want to drive the number of started intake processes. We want to increase the number of vetted sellers, of cars vetted. Maybe we still have to understand more of things that happen along the lines of the buyer journey. So you always can work with delivery and with discovery OKRs, right? To make sure you structure your strategy, translate your strategy into action. You can translate the uncertainties, the question marks in your strategy into both things. So that's almost the end of the stuff I brought with me. Again, this was a simplified journey of going from, okay, that's a product team operating within a certain company strategy context, certain challenges, making certain decisions and certain choices about the product strategy, translating this product strategy into lagging proxy metrics, and thinking about what are potential leading indicators we could utilize to structure our actual work to get to metrics you can now use to measure your progress doing OKR check-ins, right? So before we jump into the questions, and I'm happy to revisit any parts on the board, as a quick reminder, if you're interested in getting your hands on the slides I just shared in the recording, in the walkthrough, you can just sign up to my free newsletter and reply to the first email after you confirmed your subscription. Reply to the email and just say airfocus. I will send you the slides I showed you today via email. So you can complement the recording by looking at the slides as a PDF later on as well. So make sure you visit this link, herbig.link/airfocus-slides, or just scan the QR code and you can respond to the email after you confirmed your subscription. And I will send you the slides I showed you today, which again can help you revisit those materials next to the recording you will receive anyways. So I'm curious to jump into a couple of questions. I've already seen a few of them in the chat. I'm going to look at these in the Miro board just to make it easier for me to go back to some of the materials I shared. And also it's easier for me to mark the questions as resolved already. So let's look at the first one. How do you change the culture of a company from short-term delivery-focused mindset to this long-term product strategy mindset? Any tips, advice? Of course, that's a big question, and it's difficult to answer that in a few minutes in the chat. To answer that seriously, of course, it would be important to understand the context of your company and what makes them focused on such short-term decisions. I think an important thing to remember is that this 6 to 18 months time horizon might only be really feasible for companies that are post-Series A, post-product market fit, and more sustainable value creation. If you're much more scrappy, much more early on, you have to operate at a shorter cadence, and that's totally fine. In general, what I would want to invite you is if you struggle with short-term priorities, the people who give you those short-term priorities, just really try to show to them that what they're providing is not really a trade-off, right? The job of strategy, I would probably say, invest in the shared understanding of getting everyone to understand that strategy is about enabling teams to say no to things, and do that first. And through that lens, it should be more clear that what they are providing to you is not really product strategy. So focus on that, focus on what's the job strategy has to provide. Do you agree on that? Agree on the time horizon, again, right? This is about for what time horizon are we trying to articulate what we're doing, what we're not doing. And maybe the third one would be to challenge them and ask them really, like, what are we not going to do? Like, talk to me about the anti-statement I mentioned earlier. Make an explicit expression of what you're not trying to do. So these are some generalized prompts. I think that can be helpful. Again, for a more reliable answer, I would need to know more about your company. Why do so many product managers, companies have problems developing a product strategy? Please give your top 3 reasons. This is quite timely because when people sign up for my newsletter, I ask them what they struggle with. And I ask, in the context of product strategy, the top 3 things I routinely get is, on the one hand, not knowing where to get started with product strategy, right? And I think this can be contributed to the number of blog posts around canvases and frameworks and best practices of product strategy that can be really, really overwhelming. Hopefully we're able to provide you an alternative, which is to focus on the core value of product strategy and just think about, what do I have to articulate that allows my team to say no to things over the next 6 to 18 months? The second top reason I oftentimes get is the lack of alignment between company and product strategy. Again, we touched on that as well, like demand certain clarity along the generalized product strategy patterns on the company level. So you have a better focus on the product level. And the third one is the execution. So funnily enough, I try to touch on all of these three things in the highest level, which is, okay, basically fundamentally speaking, whatever your strategy articulation is, ask yourself, how would we know this has worked in the form of a metric over the course of, let's say, 12 months? I think these are the top three challenges people have with product strategy based on the data I get. What should be the balance between output and outcome-focused objectives? Again, difficult to say because I think it's not about universal definition of how goals have to look like. Goals have to match your way of working to be more useful. I think I like that quote from Ravi Mehta. So don't beat yourself up about a certain quote or relationship between output and outcome objectives. There are undisputable benefits of having outcome-oriented goals. So aim for outcome goals, but don't beat yourself up if you can't get to them. If you're in a state where you're very explorative and very early stage and you can't really have a lot of customer data, it's fine to work with output goals to structure your work. Again, goals should allow you to measure your progress. Whether that's outcome or output-based doesn't really make a difference. It's about what helps you to measure your progress. What are your thoughts of adopting OKRs in traditional, not organized product companies? They can work. Typically, I'm very unemotional. I'm unattached to OKRs, so I don't really try to convince people to use OKRs. I want to convince people to use useful and valuable ways to measure their progress for whatever goal system you want to use. OKRs are a possible way of doing that, again, but whether it's OKRs or not doesn't really matter to me. So in general, I think you can do that because even if you're not organized around products, you hopefully have some kind of strategic priority. And if you have a strategic priority, you can translate it into measurable metrics that signal your progress. So I think that isn't really a big issue. You might face more pushback, more process hurdles, more lack of quality inputs to your goal definition in a non-product organized company. That would be my top thing to pay attention to. Like the process will be much more rocky, much more slow probably, because it might not come as natural, as easy to a non-product company to work with OKRs. But in short, give it a try because this fundamental idea of what are we doing, what are we not doing, how would we know it has worked, that's universal. That's not attached to a framework. Any other questions or thoughts people would like to talk through?
Can I just jump in? It
Sure.
seems like there is no more questions. If you do, I mean, like we still have 5 more minutes, so please drop them there. I would like to thank you, Tim, for this amazing session. It was really like shocking for me to see. I've actually never been in the process where I was involved from product vision to the OKRs from it. This was my first time, and I love it. Nice. It was really great to see how you can actually turn all the ideas into quarterly OKRs. I hope this also inspired our audience as well. And I would like to thank you to our audience for being this active in the chat and joining us within this mock case. Yes, so there is no more questions, it seems like. And I would like to take the opportunity to invite our audience for our upcoming session, which is going to be next week. And let me drop the banner and the QR code here. Is going to be a roundtable discussion on product operations, the way to seamless collaboration, product ops. And you see the QR code there. You can just go register there. You don't even have to register since you're already here. You can just click, I want to be there in the link. So yes, please bring your questions and be as active as there too. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing session. And Let me see if there is anything else in the chat. Just thanking you. Really, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Make sure to stay in touch, say hi on LinkedIn or whatever you want to do, or sign up for the newsletter and say hi there. Really looking forward to staying in touch.
I will be sending a follow-up email to you with all the links that Tim's mentioned, the newsletter and everything, and the replay button included. So you can share it with your colleagues and everyone. So I am wishing you a nice rest of your week and day, and see you next week.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye, everybody.